I'm used to standing up, so it's a bit strange to sit down. I'll do the best that I can. Hello, welcome. I'm Lesley Ann. I'm a writer. I am a travel writer mainly and a playwright, and I'm creative director of Open Road. That's our mission statement up there. We're a cultural organisation based in Aberdeen. We work with storytelling and people and place. Also, as Adam said, I am a story weaver with Scottish Communities Climate Action Network, and we tell positive stories of community climate action against climate change. And I'm going to be talking about all of these. But firstly, or was it just enter? That one. Oh, yeah. I will ask you a question. Why is the story of the end of the world easier to believe than the end of capitalism? And I believe that the answer is quite simply because no one is telling the story of the end of capitalism. So, as you might have guessed, I take a story-based approach to communicating climate change. I'll share some examples of my work, and then I will also give you some examples of what you can do, how you or your organisation, you as an individual, can communicate climate change and begin to tell a different story by both what you say and what you do. I would like to start, however, putting my money where my mouth is and telling you a story. Gonna work? Yeah. There are no unicorns in this story, but there are bikes, and that is a random bike picture to illustrate it. So the story I'm going to tell you is one that I told when I was invited by Sustrans to be part of their campaign to encourage active travel and to speak at an evening event which launched the Walking and Cycling Index for Aberdeen, which I'm sure you've all read. It's been all of your bedtime reading. I'm a keen cyclist, and I have been since the days that my feet could touch the pedals. And I am a firm believer that active travel is beneficial for the physical and mental health and well-being of ourselves, our communities, our towns, our cities, and our planet. And at this evening event, other people were speaking about the research and the statistics, and I decided to instead to tell a story, the story of what cycling means to me. And I hope that in doing so, I will bring the facts, figures, and statistics to life and encourage that emotional engagement, which we've already heard about, and the importance of active travel alongside that kind of intellectual engagement, which all of that facts, figures, and report were going to provide. So see what you think. Once upon a time. My relationship with bikes began with George Horn, my maternal grandfather. George lived in Coventry. He worked as a foreman in one of the car factories that the Midlands were famous for. George hated cars. He thought they polluted his city and he refused to learn to drive. Instead, George cycled everywhere. My first experience of a bike was sitting on the basket of his while my sister sat on the saddle as he pushed us through the streets of Coventry from his house to his allotment on one of our many visits. I believe this gave me a different relationship with my grandfather and his city than if he'd packed us into a car and driven us there. I learned how it was possible to get around on two wheels, just how much a bike can carry, and develop a curiosity, confidence, and sense of belonging on the city streets. When George died, his bike was donated to the Coventry Museum of Transport. Years later, I got my first bike for Christmas, which was a really big deal because my parents didn't have a lot of money. It was the best gift that they've ever given me, and possibly one my father regretted as he spent most of that Christmas day anxiously running behind me and my sister as we took to the streets for the first time on two wheels. The streets, of course, in those days had far less traffic on them. That bike gave me a sense of freedom from an early age, and the better I became at cycling it, the more confident I became in myself. The more confidence I gained, the further I was able to explore, both on a bike and in my life. From that Christmas onwards, bikes and cycling have taken me to school. They've enabled me to forge relationships with other children on bikes along the way. They've got me to university and back when I was a penniless student and during that time, I learned that you can cycle in the middle of winter with the right clothes as well as the height of summer. As a travel writer, walking and cycling around places I was commissioned to write about, such as the Lake District in Spain, gave me a far deeper sense of connection with people and places, which enriched my work. And personally, when times have been tough, cycling has given me a sense of escape, and with the encouragement of friends, enabled me to cycle up mountains I never thought I would conquer. When I read the Walking and Cycling Index to Aberdeen, I was heartbroken to see how few people cycle, especially women. And I'm eternally grateful to George Horn for bucking the trend, for sticking to his bike, and in doing so, introducing me to cycling. And within this story, I hope you can understand the reasons why active travel is so important, the connection it gives to people and place. It's a cheap way to get around when money is tight. It's good for health and well-being because it keeps us fit and enables us to achieve things we never thought we could. And most of all, it teaches us to think about the next generation when making decisions around traveling around the city and the planet that we call home. Now, I'm not saying that this story is a better way to encourage more people to active travel than reading Aberdeen's Walking and Cycling Index. It's just a different way to communicate. It engages different parts of our brain, and of course, you need both. And just to give you as an aside, an example of how a story had changed my life, I did quite badly at school. I came out with very poor exam results, and university was not at all an option. And then I watched Educating Rita. And I thought, if Rita could do it, I could do it. After watching that film, the life that I wanted to become became real, visible, relatable, and possible. And that's the power of story. When I got to university, I find that many more women have gone back to education because of that film. And if you want the statistics to back up that story, the number of women mature women returning to education following Educating Rita was huge. So story is powerful for both good and evil. So what is it about story that makes it work? We are narrative animals. We are hardwired for story. And just to share a story about story, when Truth knocked on everyone's door and asked to be let into their homes, he was turned away. Truth was too ugly and people did not want to let him in. So story approached Truth and said, let me dress you and make you more attractive so that people will let you in. So story dressed Truth, and when Truth approached people a second time to be let in, they opened the doors to their home and let Truth into their lives. So why is story so powerful that it persuades us to let in truth? They're powerful because it bypasses the reasoning part of our brain and taps directly into our emotions. When we reason, cognitive bypass predisposes us to interpret incoming information in terms of our preconceptions. But when we feel, we are motivated to rework our belief systems to align with our emotions. Stories also help us to learn. Information presented to us in a narrative form is much more likely to be retained than raw data, such as facts and figures. And it's been recognised for a while that the story of climate change often relies on data rather than narratives. We need data, of course we do, but we need the stories behind it to bring it to life. Stories communicate meaning and emotion, which is what motivates people to act. Now, the narratives that we are often told around climate change are negative ones, such as the end of the world, and I'm going to come back to that at the end. We need stories about solutions when it comes to climate change, not just consequences. The story has to be one of solidarity, action, and hope, and in order to make the changes that we need. And I suppose the big question is to ask is, what is the story that got us to the place that we are? The dominant narratives that we live our lives are the belief in capitalism as the best/only form of economy, and that the earth is an unlimited resource for us to plunder to grow this economy, and people to power labour to make it all work. But alternative narratives are available. I'm sure you're all familiar with the work of people like Kate Raworth or Catherine Trebek around a wellbeing economy. And we need to start telling these stories. What does a world look like that's governed by a wellbeing economy? What's it like to live there? How does it work? How do we get there? All good stories are about change and the journey and often the challenges of change and the better place that we or the character or the group of people in the story reach once they get to the end. So stories can be used in all kinds of ways to drive change or make you believe that change is necessary. And I'll just give you a few examples of some of the work that I've done. So as Adam mentioned, I work for Scottish Communities Climate Action Network and their 1,000 Better Stories initiative. And it's our job to tell positive stories of community climate action. There is masses, as you all know, going on at a community level, some brilliant work and some very brilliant new narratives. And so we try and tell those stories through our blogs and our podcasts, our everyday change makers, our members of the month. And in doing so, we enable SCAN to deliver on their Scottish Government remit of telling the story of community climate action on climate change and a just transition. If you go to the website, there's lots of links. Feel free to listen. If you're a community group and you'd like us to tell your story, please get in touch. And as an aside, what I'm starting to notice with the community groups that we talk with, they are starting to change the narratives of how they're communicating. So they're often saying things now like, if you join this community tool shed, it's not going to help the planet, it's going to make your life better. So the narrative is changing to a better life rather than saving the planet. And certainly that's a better narrative for the more challenged communities amongst us. Another example, a few years ago, I had the privilege of working with Creative Carbon Scotland, which is an organisation that connects arts and sustainability on a project called Cultural Adaptations. We worked across 4 European countries, asking how culture must adapt to the impacts of climate change and how we can use culture and creativity to help create a positive future. That's the website if anyone wants to find out more. And through that project, I worked as an embedded artist with Climate Ready Clyde, which is a cross-sector initiative supported by the Scottish Government to create a shared vision, strategy and action plan for an adapting Glasgow City region. And one of the things I aimed to foster during my time with Climate Ready Clyde Working Group was a sense that change is nothing new to the Clyde Valley region. And the transition that they are planning for and writing the strategy for was just another marker in the region's history. A region changed by the Industrial Revolution, the shipbuilding industry changed again in the late 1980s when Glasgow embraced a European city of culture, suggesting that an adaptation strategy is merely the next chapter in the story of the region. I have got a blog, if anyone cares to read it, on the Cultural Adaptations website called Let Me Tell Your Strategy, telling the story of change. The importance of that, bringing the past, present into the future of place is something that I've worked with quite a lot. I haven't got time to even begin to go into more, so I'll just skim across it for now, but can always come back. A third project whizzing through, just to give you an idea of what's happening at a national level. I was recently commissioned to be the creative lead for Scotland for a national conference called Making Theatre in a Time of Climate Crisis that took place at the end of last year. It was a joint venture between the 3 national theatres, National Theatre of Wales, National Theatre of Scotland, and National Theatre of England, hosted by the National Theatre in South Banks. And this conference was for the artistic directors across the UK to encourage artistic leadership around the climate agenda in the sector. So not just looking at our productions in terms of carbon footprints, but also looking in terms of the narratives that are played out on the nation stages. At that conference, we introduced the concept of what's called climate dramaturgy. For those of you who don't know, dramaturgy is basically how a script works. And we started to ask the questions of, does it fit in with a wider climate narrative? For example, is your story about a single white male saving the planet? If it is, you might want to change it. So let's get a little bit personal. As many of you probably know, talking about climate change to people in your own life and community is one of the most powerful ways to create a social climate for change that we need. I'd like to encourage you all to communicate your own story about climate change and how you believe the world can be a better place and what you are doing to make it happen as an individual or as an organisation. Personal lived experience, your lived truth is unlikely to be questioned or dissected, whereas facts and figures often lend themselves to arguments. Sharing your story helps others to see connections around values and the things that you care about, and so it's easier to see that you have a common cause. So I'd like to encourage you to lead by example, sharing what you do, how you do it, including your struggles. This increases your trustworthiness and makes people more likely to see a similar change, a similar change in their own lives. Finally, it's not just about what you say, it's about what you do. The way you live your life, the decisions and actions that you make communicate the story of who you are and what you believe in. And if you've not discovered Active Hope yet, I would really actively encourage that you do. It's a fantastic resource. And they talk about the 3 narratives that are playing out in the world today. The first is business as usual, that we can carry on doing things the same old way. The second is the great unraveling, that the world is in decline and falling apart. And the third is a great opportunity, crisis as a turning point to creating a more sustainable society. According to Active Hope, we have to choose a narrative, one of those 3 narratives that we believe in, to live our lives, to take action, to write our business plans for the next 3 to 5 years, to the way we run organisations based on the narrative that we choose. And so conclude, be clear that narrative has impact. When we choose a high option alternative, such as driving to the shops instead of walking or flying instead of taking the train, and of course, don't get me wrong, sometimes we do, we are telling the story of colonial privilege. We are telling the story that colonial privilege is alive and well. We are telling the story of how privileged we are because the people who are going to pay for the consequences of our choices are those who are less privileged than us. So please think about the story that you are communicating at a personal, community and organisation level, as well as using story as a means of communicating the better place that we would all like the world to be. And finally, please keep in touch. Thank you.